Hi everyone, myself Dr. M. Lakshmi Prasad, working as an associate professor in the Department of Data Science in Institute of Aeronautical Engineering, Hyderabad. So in this video, I'm going to discuss about various methods that are available for data collection. So the data collection is one of the significant segment of any kind of research studies. So at the time, when the research needs examine answers to research problem, data collection is critical for the collection of relevant information. So the data collection is very important and which is going to be very significant for research study. So at the time, whenever the researcher need to examine the answers to the research problem, so various data collection methods are available for collecting the relevant information. So if the researcher is thinking towards the data collection, so we have some of the questions like, so what, when to collect the data and which data is going to be collected and who is responsible for the data collection and means to collect how to collect those data. So researcher may have a lot of questions in order to extract the data. So for that, so what we have to do is, so the researcher normally going to be think like, so which data is going to be collected, when to collect, and who is responsible for the person, and then what means we have to collect those data. So everything should be decided by the researcher itself. And some of the methods that are available for the data collection is that, so interview is one of the method, and observation another kind of method, and questionnaire, and then focus group discussion. So these are some of the different methods that are available for collection of the data. So interview is one of the method, and then observation and questionnaire and focus group discussion and questionnaire is one of the some of the data collection techniques. Let's see one by one. So interview method. So interview refers to some spoken and dialogue. So which may be held in between the people for the aim of examining the relevant information to the research, survey, or study. And interviews forms which may be completed through interview with the respondent. So interviews refers to spoken dialogue between the people for the aim of examining the relevant information to the research, survey, or study. And this interviews forms which may be completed through an interview with the respondent. So what are the advantages of this interview is that, so accurate screening is to be done, and face-to-face interviews which helps to more accurate screening. And then we should also be capture various verbal and non-verbal cues, questions, and we should also be key focus thing, so that the interviewer is one of the person who has some control over the interview and can able to keep the interview focused and on track to completion. You can also capture the emotions and behavior, and the face-to-face interviews can no doubt capture and for the interviews emotions and behavior, and this would be treated as the better for the more complex questions also. So the advantages of the interview method is that, so accurate screening is to be done. So since we are going to be done through face-to-face interviews, we should also be helpful for accurate screening, and we can also capture verbal and the non-verbal questions as well. And in order to make you can also keep focus is to be done, since so interviewer is the person which has the control over the interview and should also be keep interview focused and track to completion, and should also capture the emotions and behavior as well, since the face-to-face interviews has no doubt to capture and interview emotions and behavior, and they are going to be better for the complex cues. So if I'm going to take the disadvantage of this interview, so this disadvantage should be that, so it should be more expensive than the questionnaires, and should also have low literacy or less cooperation, and the quality of the data by the interviewer, so the quality will also be considered. And suppose like if the quality of data you receive will often depend on the ability of the interviewer, and the manual data entry is another disadvantage. So if the interview is administered on the paper, the data collected will be to be entered manually or scan if an unexpectable interview questions is going to be created, and limited sampling size. So these are some of the disadvantages of this method, right? So it should be more expensive than the questionnaires, and it should also be low literacy and less cooperation will be done, and the quality of the data by the interviewer should also be considered. So what kind of the question the interviewer is going to be asked, so that thing also be considered. And manual entry, suppose if the interviewer is going to be record the data into a paper or manually or through scan, so it may be some miscollecting or missing information able to take place. So it's also be treated as the disadvantage of this method, and limited sampling size also. And second one is that observation method. So here the observation able to refers to the systematic collection of approach where the researchers use to all the sense use their senses, like five various sense or what we have, like, and in order to examine the people in natural settings or the natural occurring of the situations. So observations, so this observation is going to be very difficult one. So what we observe and what we're going to be recorded, and then everything is also important, and this observation will also be done through by conducting while doing the experiments itself. So while experiments means you have to be focus, very concentrate what kind of values you have to take, and anything is missing, then it should may also leads to be different problems. So what is the advantage of this method means the observation does not require the willingness of the people to provide the information about them, and it should also be treated as the simplest method when compared to the other methods. And observation is probably most of the common and simplest method of the data collection, and mainly this one is going to be used for forming hypothesis, framing hypothesis, and should also have greater accuracy, and it should be a universal method. And so since it should be an ordinary method, so used in all sciences, both physical and social, or either of them. So observation can able to deal with phenomena which are not capable of giving the verbal information about the behavior and feeling and activity simply for the reason they can't speak. So observation, so advantages is that so willingness of the people have to be considered and is not required. So it should be a simplest method among all the methods, and it should also useful for framing the hypothesis, and greater accuracy is the advantage of this method, and it is an universal method. We should also be included both the physical and the social of them. So so while coming to the disadvantages of this method, so lack of reliability will be there, and some of the incidences may not open to the observation, and not all occurrences lend themselves to the observational study, and faculty perception, faulty perception is going to be occur, and slow investigation is there. So these are some of the disadvantages of the observation. So lack of reliability. So while observing, we are unable to concentrate. So through this, the lack of reliability may attain, and some of the occurrences may also lead to the observational study, and the faulty observation or faulty perception should also be occur. Why? Because while observing, it should be a highly technical job. So one is never sure that what he is observing are same as it appeared to his eyes itself. So that should be faulty perception will also may lead to the observation. And so slow investigation. So observation is also time-taking process, while which may also leads to the disadvantage of the observation. Questionnaire method. So this means a set of printed or written question with the choice of errors, and then device for the purpose of the survey or statistical study. And according to this business, different types of questionnaires as a list usually printed and submitted for replies that cannot be analyzed for the usable information. Okay, so the questionnaire method is the set of printed or written questions with choice of answers. so which can able to devise for the purpose of the survey or for the statistical study. So some of the predefined questionnaire is to be best one and then usually printable and submitted for the which should be able to extract the useful information. So why are going to use these questionnaires? So mostly these questionnaires are helpful for the data collection method to examine the blueprint and the frequency and smoothness and success of use. And it should also be used for the users with their expectations, perspectives, priorities, and preferences, and the perception and satisfaction of the user over the particular services to be done, and shifts in user attitudes and opinions, and significance of collections and services to be user needs. So these are the some of the significant collections and services also be going to be need for the user needs. So the questionnaire means we are able to blueprint frequency and smoothness and success of the use is that very important one to the questionnaire, and needs the user with their expectations, perspectives, priorities, and preferences, and should also be significant collection services also to the user needs. So that's what we're going to be use these questionnaires. So what are the advantages of this questionnaire? So the advantages is that it should be sensible or maybe practicable, and it should also leads to collection of large amounts of information from a large number of respondents in a short period of time at the lower cost. And it should also be carried out by the researcher or by any number of people with limited effect to its validity and reliability. So the results of the questionnaire can usually be quickly and easily identified by either researcher or through the use of the software package, and can be analyzed more scientifically and objectively than other forms of the research. So when the data has been quantified, it is can be used to compare and contrast the other research that may lead to measure change. And the positives believes that the quantitative data can be used to create a new theories, and then should also be test the existing hypothesis. So these are some of the various advantages of the questionnaire. So the questionnaire means where can able to sensible or maybe practical things data can be obtained, and so since we are going to collect the large amount of information from the various respondents short period of time at the lower cost, and other advantages is that so which may also leads to affect validity and reliability data can be obtained, and it should be also be quickly and easily quantified by the either researcher or through the use of the software package, and it can be analyzed more scientifically and objectively than the other forms of the research. And when the data is going to be confident quantified, so it can be used to compare and the contrast with other research as well. And the positives believe that the quantitative data can also be used to create the theories and the test the existing hypothesis. So what are the disadvantages of this questionnaire? So since inadequate, it is difficult to understand some forms of information like change of emotions, behavior, feelings, and then it should also lacks validity and no means of telling how much thought a respondent has to put in, and the respondent may be forget or not thinking without the full context of the situation, and the people may read differently in each question and therefore reply based on their own interpretation of the question. So these things we can able to uh, consider while the questionnaires, which makes the disadvantages of this. So inadequate to understand some forms of information, so that should be change of emotions, behavior, feelings, and it should also may leads to lacks of validity, and so no means of telling how much of uh, thought a respondent has to put in have to be considered, and The respondent may also be forgetful, not thinking within the full context of the situation, and people may also read differently each question, therefore, based on their own interpretation of the question. Focus group discussion method. So this is the other kind of method what we're having. So it is a very good method of gathering together people from similar background and experience to converse a special or specific topic of interest necessary for the study. So the focus group able to provide the opportunity to hear the in-depth objectives and the perceptions of individuals in which the group setting is so as to more completely understood the situation at hand. So the focus group discussion is the very good method for gathering the people together from the similar backgrounds or experiences to converse to convey a specific topic of interest that are noted for the study. And these focus groups are able to provide some opportunity to hear the in-depth attitudes and perceptions of the individual in a group setting, and so as to completely understand the issue at hand. So, what are the advantages of this GD that should be the focus group discussion? So, it should be easily measured the customer reaction and then slowly oriented the research method, and it should be flexible one. So, high phase validity and the speedy results can able to obtain, and then but low cost also, and the participation or giving a chance to reflect or to react the viewpoint of the others, so with which may be disagree or for which they are unaware. So some of this will be the disadvantages of the FGD. So that means that we can easily measure this customer reaction, and socially oriented research method is one, and it should be flexible and high phase validity is there, and it should also be where the results can be obtained in a speedy nature but also low cost. So what are the disadvantages of this focus group discussion? So focus group discussion is not as in-depth, so because so when compared to the individual interviews, the focus groups are not as efficient in covering maximum depth of the particular issue, and the data can be difficult to analyze, and expensive is nothing but when compared to the surveys and questionnaires, so the focus groups are more much expensive to execute, and usually each participant will have to be compensated in a cash or in kind. So next one is that moderate bias. So moderate bias means the moderators can able to give greatly impact on the outcomes of the focus group discussion, less control than the individual interviews, and moderates must be skilled, and moderates FGD typically is not replicable. So these are some of the disadvantages of this focus group discussion, right? So in this, it should be not as in depth when compared to why, because when compared to the interviews, there may be a chance of focus groups are not that much efficient in covering the maximum depth of a particular issue, and the data can be also be difficult to analyze and expense. So that means that when compared to the surveys and questionnaires, the focus groups are much more expensive to execute. Usually, each participant should have to be compensated in cash or in kind. And so the moderate bias, that means that the moderators can greatly impact the focus group discussion and should also have less control than the individual interviews, and moderators should also be skilled one. Right, so in this video what I'm going to cover is, so what are the various methods that are available for collecting the data. So the data collection should be one of the significant segment of any type of research study, and at the time, so when the researcher need to examine the answers to research problems. So the data collection method should be critical for collecting the relevant information. So in order to avoid the researcher, many of the researchers going to have some of the common questions like, so when to collect, where to collect, and then what kind of data is going to be collected, and what we are going to collect, like this. So some of the methods that are available for the data collection is that interview, observation, questionnaire, and focus group discussion method, right? So interview is one of the method, and observation, questionnaire, and FGD, so focus group discussion. So interview is nothing but it should be refers to some spoken dialogue between this people and the other interviewer. So it should be where you can able to extract the data directly from the respondent. So what are the advantages of this one means? So accurate screening is to be done. So it is one of the advantage, and then should also be capture verbal, non-verbal questions, and keep focus on these things. And we should also be capture emotions and behaviors, and but they are not better for the more complex questions. When it comes to disadvantages, so it should be more expensive than the questionnaires, and low literacy or less cooperation is needed, and the quality of the data by the interviewer should also be disadvantage of this method, and manual data entry and limited sampling size. So these are some of the disadvantages of this method. And second method what we're having is observation method. So observation should be refers to the systematic collection approach, where the many of the researchers are going to use this to examine the people in natural settings or natural occurring situations. And through this observation, so the engagement of engaging the observing the experiment values and identifying these values through experiments should also make a lot of confusion. So what this the person is observing correctly the data or not, and then correctly recording or not, that and all have to be taken care. So the advantages of this method is, so this should be the simplest method, and then mainly going to be useful for framing the hypothesis, and should also have greater accuracy, and it should also be treated as the universal method, since even though it should be an ordinary method in used in all sciences, so both physical and social or either of them can be used there. So the observation can also be deal with the phenomena which are not capable of giving verbal information about their behavior, feeling, activities, and simply for the reason that cannot be spoken. So the disadvantage of observation is that, so lack of reliability can be obtained with this method, and some of the instances may not open to observation, or not all occurrences lead themselves to observation study. And two types of perceptions would be very important: faulty perception and slow investigation. So these are the disadvantages of this method. And questionnaire method. So the questionnaire method is the other method which is going to be useful for the statistical study. And so why are mostly this questionnaires is to be done? So it's mainly this one is going to be used for the data collection purpose. So in order to get the frequency, smoothness, and success of the data, and the perception and satisfaction of the user should also be important, and it should also be significance of collections and services to the user needs. So the advantages of this method is that it should be sensible and practical. Mm, and it should also be collection of large amount of information from large numbers of respondent, and we can also be carried out the researchers can also be carried out the data what should be validity one, and it should be reliability one, and the results of the questionnaire should also be quickly and easily quantified by the researcher, and can also be analyzed more scientifically and objectively than other forms of the research. And disadvantage of this questionnaire is that it should have inadequate to understand some of the information like changes in emotion and behavior and feelings like this validity, and the response may also be forgetful or not thinking within the full context, and the people also may lead to have differently in each question and therefore reply to their own interpretation. And focus group discussion method is another method where we can able to perform uh, gathering of together people from the similar backgrounds or expertise to converse the specific topic of interest, and that is going to be needed, necessary for the study. And advantages of this method will be we can easily measure the customer reaction, and it should be slow, socially oriented research approach, and it should be flexible and high face validity, and speedy results can be obtained, and it should be low in cost. And disadvantage is that, so the disadvantage, it is not as in depth, so because when compared to the individual interviews, the focus groups are not efficient in covering of maximum depth as particular issue. And expense, so when compared to the other surveys and questionnaires, so the focus groups should be more expensive and so in order to execute, and since the participants will have to be compensated into a cash in kind. And moderate bias, so moderate bias means where the moderators can greatly impact the outcome of the focus group discussion, and less control over the individual interviews, and moderators will be mostly skilled one, and this focus group discussions should be typically not reliable. Thank you.
Like, share, and subscribe. Hit the bell icon for more updates.